when people talk about spice, they often misrepresent it as heat.
I agree.
That's only
Yeah.
one part of
Yeah.
spice. And when you say Indian food is spicy, I don't think you should mean that it's a Scoville scale heat.
Yeah.
Spices,
Well,
like you said
I
now,
completely
is
agree with you. I
aromatics.
think there is a huge difference between spicy in the context of heat and chilies and spiced in
the
terms
terms
of
of
using a much
aromatics.
wider range of very pungent, flavorful spices that don't necessarily add to the trigeminal sensation. So
Correct.
the tingling, the heat, the pain element, and are much more on the side of aromatics and flavor.
That's right. That's right. I mean, some have a combination of the two as well. Take, for example, cinnamon or even nutmeg. A very a tiny dose of cinnamon would probably the first impression is the fragrance, the aroma, and then you do get the heat. Similarly with nutmeg as well, but these spices are used in traces in microscopic quantities, really, and perhaps more for their curative properties than we seem to understand today.
Well, Indian cuisine is so well known for being spiced. As someone who has spent so many years working on finding that balance, would you say that you have mastered that balance, or is it something that shifts, or does it depend on who you're cooking for? Or I'm sure these are all kind of elements within it, but is there do you get to a point, I guess my question is, with Indian cooking where you kind of just know how to not only season but spice things to get the exact result that you're looking for?
I think it's probably very hard to say that anybody could attain spice nirvana in the way you describe it. I think as Indian chefs, we are trained from the very beginning to use our hands. We don't. It's not pastry or baking where you need precision. We tend to use our hands to add spices into a dish, and certainly that allows you to smell the aroma of the cumin powder and then decide based on its strength of aroma whether you need more or less. The quality of the spice is the key criteria, in my opinion.
How do you assess the quality of the spice? What would be your...
I think the best way to use spices at home is to buy small quantities of the best quality you can find. And often the shop-bought brands are not probably the best.
So I was going to ask you, can you get really good quality Indian spices in the UK?
The answer is yes. And in fact, I have found in my 20 years here that it's even better than you can find in India.
Really?
And there's a very simple reason for that. Like all our fantastic produce in India, the best quality fetches the best price for export.
Gets exported, yeah.
It happens to our seafood, it happens to all our spices,
Yeah.
and for that reason alone, you can get far superior quality of spices in one location, under one roof in London than I could get in a whole day trawling markets in New Delhi, for example.
Wow. Because I had a family friend who brought me back some spices from India, and you see, I was sitting there going on about, you see, you won't get spices like this over here. Yeah, this is the real stuff. But I guess a part of that is also the placebo of knowing that it had come from India made me kind of perhaps...
Yes, there are some things, I think. I have friends who bring in fresh curry leaves, for example, from India. You do get them, but they're flown in and quite expensive now here.
Yeah.
But in terms of any dry spices, the most stable spices, I think the quality you get here in London is far superior to what you get in India, both whole as well as ground. Also because our processes and health and safety regulations demand a certain standard.
Sure.
And there's no adulteration as well. In India, adulteration is a big thing. I think sadly happens to our food as well. Yeah. And therefore, you cannot guarantee the quality that you get in India. But here, Certainly not in the supermarkets, but there are food manufacturing industries sourced from mills largely based around Leicester that specialize in procuring the best quality of whole Indian spice. They roast them and grind them and clean them in the UK. And those certainly are the best quality. So we used to actually buy our spices for the restaurants from a factory in Leicester.
So
But certainly for a more home use, I think the best you can do is to buy a small quantity, grind them freshly at home. So a small coffee grinder is ideal, and grind just as much as you might use, so not too much. So those really tiny coffee grinders where you can grind 5 or 6 grams is probably the best thing to go.
And then once you've got these great spices, you've ground them, how do you use them properly? And I say properly because when I was working at the Connaught many years ago, one of my colleagues was from south of India, and I remember him showing me how he would cook the base of a curry. And it was nothing like what I would have done in terms of an approach to how I would have gone about it. And I remember that fundamentally changed how I would start a lot of kind of curries at the base, the gravy. But you're going to, I'm sure, explain a lot better than I can.
I think as I keep telling young chefs, the rule is that there is no rules. For the simple reason that I think each one of us are born with and blessed with a different taste perspective, a different understanding of flavor, a different understanding of likes and dislikes, as you know so well here at Kitchen Theory. And the simplest way I can suggest you delve into spices is to try them as single spices. So say fennel seeds, for example. Raw, throw some in your mouth, chew them, okay. Toasted, you'll get slightly different, more pronounced notes, more sweetness, and then that's a flavor memory that you keep aside. And then you proceed with cumin and pepper and chili and fennel and star anise and so on and so forth.
Kind of build up that olfactory memory.
Absolutely. And then you can start working on combinations. I remember reading somewhere that Indian cuisine seems to break all the rules of flavor pairings.
Yeah.
You probably know a lot more in depth than me on that, but I remember reading it somewhere. And
there's actually
that
more
probably
foods
also
that have,
explains.
Because in Western food, they'll find that a lot of foods have
complementing
the more, let's say, molecules they have in common. Perhaps they might be paired together more frequently, but they found that the reverse was true of Indian and I think other Asian cuisines. Right. So yeah, there is something that's quite unique in that sense.
And I think that is true of the more ancient cuisines. Certainly, what we know as Indian cuisine today is an amalgamation of all the influences that subcontinent has had over the years, be it conquests, invasions, our neighbors, of course, and all these have resulted in this melting pot of what is Indian cuisine today. We know a large part of northern Indian food has come from the Middle East. A lot of spices from North Africa and the Middle East have been incorporated. Bread, of course, was brought from the Middle East as well as from the Portuguese. The chili and the tomato were brought to India by the Portuguese, 400 years ago? It's maybe a little more than that. But it's shocking. It's shocking to imagine Indian food today without chili or tomato, and yet you just go back 3 generations and the oldest recipe books in India would probably have pepper as the main flavoring and not chili. That's the native spice.